Good morning again, Coffee Chat friends and anybody else there out on Video Land. A few comments here on our Coffee Chat meeting which took place this week. The topic was communities. Took a few notes, have a few thoughts, a few follow-up thoughts on the meeting. Just going to share those with you here. We went around the room once again. I think we had 19 people there, and everybody gave their input. Not everybody, it's all voluntary of course, but most people gave some input on what they thought about this idea of community. I'm just going to pick out a few things that jumped out at me. To start with, that is, there was the idea of business community. It's people we associate for business. There are cultural communities that people involve themselves in, and we see that especially in an area like this where you have a lot of different people from different cultures of the world. There are new communities which people meet with, and that would be Coffee Chat would be an example of that, perhaps. And of course they are voluntary and they are chosen. There are what one guy called default communities, which are communities we seem to appear into without necessarily having made a conscious choice to join that community. We may have joined for other reasons, for example, for work. We go to work, and then after a while we have a community there. We didn't go there to join the community so much as we went there to work, but then we by default have a community in a way. Families are another one. I mean, most of us don't get the idea that we chose somehow our families, but yeah, that's a community. There's the old versus the new community, and I'll get a little bit into that too, as alluded to. Neighborhoods were mentioned, and neighborhoods can become like extended families, somebody mentioned. There are schools, church, work, relationship communities. Some are supportive communities, some are not supportive communities. Lots of different types of communities. There can be distant communities. Some people have families where members live all over the world. They still keep in community in a way, but there's a distant relationship. Somebody said that true communities are rarer now than they were at one time. I'll touch on that a little bit as I go on here. Somebody talked about the value of having diversity in the community. We talked a lot about having community being the similarities that people share. Well, one guy mentioned he likes the idea of community having diversity also, because from diversity we can grow, or something along that lines. There was the talk of the small town community versus the city community, which can be quite different. There can be the new sense of evolving community, which I'll touch on as well. There's, once again, old-time communities were mentioned quite a few times, and I'll touch on that as well. And also the new community. So I prepared a little bit of a thing here, which just, it sort of dawned on me as I went along, which was something that was touched on in the discussion. And basically it's along the lines of this, that community normally, as we experience, is an experience of, in a way, of us individually relating to others. It's a relationship, and it's a relationship usually with many people. And the word community comes from the word common originally. So often the reason there's a community is because there's a commonality. You think of family, you think of neighborhood, you live in the same area. A work community, you're working on the same sort of projects. The coming together of a group like Coffee Chat, there would be commonalities in terms of people looking for growth in some way, looking for companionship or fellowship in some way, or there's something there that others would have as well. There's a commonality, and when it's found, well, people will stay in the community, or they will participate at a certain level, or what have you. So that's kind of what I saw as the gist of community. But in this discussion, I noticed that there was quite a number of mentions of older communities in terms of almost in a tone of lament for what was, and the value that those communities had in terms of the tightness. And in a very Saskatchewan way, I suppose, older small town, maybe rural communities were such that you didn't have to call to go visit the neighbor. You just showed up. If you ran out of butter, you could go to the neighbor and get some butter, and then sit down and have a chat, or what have you. And doors weren't locked. The kids could go here and there. It was like a larger family, extended family. There wasn't much mention of the darker sides of some of these communities, because those things existed too, but there was mostly, it seemed to be the remembrance of the tightness of those communities and the support and so on. On the contrast, it was mentioned a few times of the more modern, city type community, where people are more reserved, more individual, and to the point where you can have neighbors who will come and go from their houses without saying hello. And one guy even mentioned that he was in Toronto and people would walk right past him and not even say hello, because everybody was rushing here. There was this importance to get somewhere, and it seemed like there was millions of people there, but nobody noticed anybody. So there was that contrast, the small town to that. And later on there was the mention of the emerging community, which is the online community, this whole Facebook and so on community, where you can have people who know people all over the world, but they don't really know them. They know them in that realm, in that online realm. So it becomes very easy to unfriend or friend somebody. It's a funny thing actually, that there's a verb now called unfriend. It's just a push of a button. It's much easier to, you don't have to go for a chat and say, look, I disagree with it. You just push the button unfriend. So it's an incomplete relationship, you might say. I don't think we have to go far to agree with that. But then there was, interestingly enough, as we came around the room, there was one guy who talked about how what he sees as this emerging, or my understanding of it anyways, I could be off on this, but this evolving type of community where we want the human aspect, and we also want the instantaneous communication aspect. So the blending of the two will be this emerging community. And then somebody else mentioned the Meetup.com phenomenon, which is that this company is having a hard time keeping up with all of these clubs coming up, because people have had Facebook for so long, and now they also want the real thing of actually meeting people. But so they're having the way you can sign up to gatherings online, and then actually go and meet real people. So, and that creates communities as well, and it creates communities sometimes which are compatible with one another. So it seemed like, anyways, that without exception, almost without exception, unless we're hermits, we all want community. It's like we're social beings in a way, and if that is so, then what? What is it that we can do to enhance our communities? what participation can we have to enhance our communities? Well, all of these things, and especially these emerging technologies that are coming up, we can, if we don't like the communities that we're in, we can actually find other communities that are out there doing things or talking about things or involved with things that we're interested in. There's something common, and we can check them out and maybe get involved in those communities. And of course, through all the things that we talk about at Coffee Chat, about really improving ourselves in a way, when we improve ourselves, by extension our communities, because our input is improved as we see ourselves improving, and we get back some of that as well. But something I mentioned too there, which didn't come up, but it's an interesting aspect of community, which is this, that is not talked about much outside of religious circles. And I put forth the clarity point there, that I wasn't trying to convert anybody to anything. It was just an observation. But there's this concept of communion, which takes place in religious circles, and it's not so much intended to be a communion activity with man to man, man to woman, etc. It's the community with what people feel as their creator. And a lot of people have a different take on what this creator is, or can be, or is visioned as, or whatever. That's kind of irrelevant. The point being that there are millions of people throughout the world who go through what they call communion rituals. And not only communion rituals, but communion practices to get closer to this feeling of connection, which what they feel has created them. And this is community as well. And some would say it's actually like a higher level of communion. If you can imagine pictographically, if human beings are here, well, we have all these other human beings that we want. Some of them we would want to have a community with. Some we don't. Some we would, right? But there's also man's perception of what has created everything else in an order of creation or whatever. Well, there's that sense at times to somehow get a sense of that. And that is community as well. And that is the whole spiritual realm, you might say. And that's community as well, I would say. And it's community to the point where there are people who can literally live as hermits off on their own. They appear to not be social creatures, but in fact they are social creatures as far as their experience is concerned, because they have that sense of community. Now you might say that's deluded, you might say that that's crazy, you might say it's whatever, but nevertheless the results are such, and I've met one such individual, the results are blissful happiness. It's really quite odd. Quite odd from the outward optics of it anyways. Those are my thoughts on community, and, well, of course, not only my thoughts of others as well. I will do a little write-up here too, which will be on the blog. You're welcome to have a look at that, and yeah, I'll talk to you in a couple of weeks. Oh, and by the way, that we're having a speakers forum in a few days with laying seats, and perhaps you'd be interested in that as well. But every 2 weeks, this is Coffee Chat takes place. And our next topic for Coffee Chat, so far, somebody suggested wealth. What is true wealth? I'll talk to you in a few weeks, and hope we can see you out at one of our meetings. All the best for now. Bye-bye.